So I'm presenting to you a new project of ours where we want to know what the general public currently thinks about current changes in our technological landscape. And so the reason we're interested in this topic is basically shown on this slide here. So how humans engage with new technologies really can shape their personal life, but also the economic welfare of the nation they live in. This is really true across history. So really what people do or don't do with technology can sort of influence if their nation will succeed or not succeed in the long run. But it's important to note that technological progress is not just a scientific question and also not just an economic question, but it's also a deeply personal and a deeply emotional one. Because you can quite clearly see this also at the current discussion that we have about artificial intelligence, which is, of course, a major technology discussed at the moment everywhere. And when you read about artificial intelligence just in the general press, you will find quite positive outlooks partially. These are shown with a couple of examples. So basically, to come to the left side, there's just some examples why people might be hopeful with the new technologies. And you hear promises have been made that AI might have the potential to cure all diseases, or that via AI we might be able to create a better society because artificial intelligence might help us to take up some of the labor that needs to be done here. And there's also this idea that we will actually see a democratization of finance and business, so that basically AI helpers will help to level the playing field between rich and poor people, for example. And this all sounds very hopeful, but then we go to the right-hand side, and then you also find that there's actually a lot of concerns about artificial intelligence. So here's the warning of cybercrime, which might increase due to AI. There's also this big concern about job losses due to AI. Here it's actually the talk of an AI apocalypse in the job market. And actually, there's also the talk of a real apocalypse. So the prediction has been made, even by scientists, that if AI gets smart enough, will just get rid of us humans altogether and basically lead to our extinction. So either AI will solve all our problems or it will kill us all. So these are sort of the two poles that we live in between right now. So as you can see, there's clearly a lot of emotions going on when we talk about this new technology. And it's also important to note that this is not specific to artificial intelligence, but this has really been the case across human history whenever a new technology came around. People have strong feelings about the potential effects. And that's why we wanted to know what currently the general population thinks about these issues. And we did a truly global study to find out. So this year we surveyed over 25,000 people from 25 nations around the world. So it's a huge data set, and it's quite a unique data set in that sense. And so we asked all these people from different countries what they currently see as important technological changes, and importantly, how they feel about it. Do they think this is a good thing for themselves in their country, or do they think this is a bad thing? And I should note, we have 25,000 people from 25 nations, meaning around 1,000 people per nation. And these people for our survey were picked in a manner so that they're roughly representative of the underlying population of this country. So this is a fairly representative and massive sample we got here. And also it was important for us really to get a representative sample of the general population. So these are not specific experts or people who work in tech, but really just sort of the general citizens. What should they think about what's currently happening? And these are the countries that we have chosen for our survey. To let you know about the methodology here, so we aimed to get as many of the G20 nations we could get. We couldn't get all of them because, for example, at the moment, collecting data from Russia or China about these topics is a bit difficult, but most of them. But then we also added a number of countries to get a more balanced perspective when it comes to different regions in the world, but also to different economic levels, you could say. So we aimed to include both so-called advanced economies, so basically wealthy countries, as well as also emerging economies, so countries that are not as wealthy at the moment. And thus classification, either being advanced or emerging, comes actually from the International Monetary Fund. It's quite a binary way to think about countries, because even within emerging or within advanced economies, there's huge variations. But also, as you will see in a moment when we talk about the data, this scheme helps us to get sort of the first orientation about different trends that we find here. Okay, so we have quite a wide reach, and one point I like to stress here is, basically these 25 nations we have here represent about 40% of the world populations and about 70% of world GDP. So this selection we have here is hugely important for economic activity on this planet right now. And so what do all these 25,000 people now think about new technologies? To start us off, we'll basically ask people kind of a very sort of basic questions. Do they actually think that there's a lot of technological change happening right now? So what we asked them was, do we expect either more or less technological change in the next 5 years compared to the last 5 years? And basically more technological change is here shown in red, and less technological change is seen in blue. So do people think that things are heating up or that things are cooling down when it comes to technological innovations? And this is now the data from these 25 countries. And as you can see, there's a lot of red. So basically in all countries, a majority of people currently thinks that we will see more technological change in the next couple of years. This means basically that the general public is of the opinion that we're living in a time of accelerating technological change. So a lot is happening. Maybe also interesting to note here, because our institute is in Germany, is that actually Germans from all these 25 countries are least likely to expect a faster technological change in the near future. But even in Germany, it's still like a slim majority that thinks that. So across the world, people really brace for impact of technological changes that they anticipate in the near future. And now the big question for us is, how do people actually feel about this? Do they embrace this, or do they rather think this is dangerous and a risk for them? And to study this, it's actually important to note that, of course, technology can have quite a lot of effects on different domains or aspects of your life. And this we also wanted to have reflected in our survey to sort of represent this diversity of effects that technology can have. And that's why we actually asked a number of questions about the new technologies here. And we always used the same format. So each participant was asked this type of question. In the next 5 years, how do you think new technologies will affect? And then we asked both about aspects of personal well-being, so your economic and financial situation, your personal happiness, your relationships and social life. And we also asked them about aspects of their nation's well-being. Do you think new technologies will affect the economic well-being in your country, peace and safety in your country, and unity and harmony between the people in your country? And for each of these different life aspects, people could basically say, do they think they rather see a negative effect or rather a positive effect? I guess it's just to test this. I think we have a test question here today. I'm not sure if we can start this now. So maybe you can just sort of get yourself into the position of our respondents. I would just ask you to give your spontaneous response to one of these questions here. So in the next 5 years, how do you personally think will new technologies affect the economic well-being in your country? This now goes from mostly negative to mostly positive. Okay, then I think that we can show the results there. I hope they're on the screens. What we see here is it's quite mixed, I would say, but overall it seems like that I would guess, probably a bit more than the half of the people here currently here think that the effects will be somewhat positive or mostly positive. So on average, you could say that the group joining together here online is on average rather more positive than negative when it comes to the economic effects of new technologies. So thank you for this. This is a very self-selecting group. I assume that a lot of you have interest in this topic. But we then want to do this type of format then with the general population, we see how the general public feels about this. And maybe to give you a bit more inkling about why we asked the question the way we did, maybe you wondered about this yourself while you were filling out this one question. So we're asking about the next 5 years. And this is because we want people to focus really on ongoing developments that they feel like they have to prepare for right now. So we don't want people to write science fiction stories about what they think will happen in 100 years or 200 years, but really what do they expect right now in the next 5 years. So the really immediate changes that are happening according to them. And then I would also like to emphasize that we intentionally use this term new technologies in this part of our survey, because we didn't want to just focus on one specific technology. So we didn't ask specifically about artificial intelligence or driverless cars or anything like this. Because when you ask about one specific technology, of course, individual people will have more or less experience with this technology. They will have more or less strong opinions about this one technology. But what we're aiming at here is to find sort of the general feeling that people have about the general direction of technological change overall. And this is why we intentionally use this type of format. And now, of course, we could look into all of these different life aspects that people had to answer here. And of course, we're also doing this in our research. But what I find more interesting is actually that we can basically now create averages for each person and then for each country. So we're averaging across all these items from these different persons. And then we basically get something like an average technology optimism score for each country. And this optimism score, in effect, is basically a measure of percentage of people that have an optimistic opinion about the effect of new technologies overall. So which country has the most optimist and which country has the most pessimist when it comes to new technologies. And this is now basically then our official ranking that I will show you now. So basically on the left, you will see the more optimistic countries, and on the right, you will see the less optimistic countries when it comes to new technologies. And this is what we found out. So on the left, according to our survey from all of these 25 countries, we find that India at the moment, for example, is the most technology optimistic nation, followed by Indonesia and Morocco. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you see Netherlands, Switzerland, Japan, Germany, again at the fourth place. So these are the countries that are at the least optimistic at the moment when it comes to technological change. So there are several interesting things to note about this ranking we have here. The first is, I think it's important to note that there actually is a lot of variation when it comes to technology optimism between nations. Because you could also think, of course, each country has the optimist, each country has the pessimist. So maybe then on average, it averages out, and then you have sort of the same kind of overall number in each country. But this is clearly not the case. So we find that in some countries, they are much more technology optimistic than in other countries at the moment. And maybe also interesting to note, when you look at the ranking of these different countries, I could imagine it's maybe not the ranking that many people would have expected. So at least not what we were expecting when we did this research. For example, when you look at the United States, you will actually find this the midpoint roughly of our scale, meaning the United States are neither extremely positive nor extremely negative when it comes to technologies. And it's interesting because the United States are, of course, really on the forefront of a lot of technological developments and also a lot of economic developments. But this is not necessarily reflected on the optimism of the people that live in this country. And this actually then brings me to a wider point that we wanted to investigate here. How is actually the optimism in a country related to the economic activity in this country? This is kind of what we're after here. And because when you think about it, who will benefit first from new technologies? It's usually in the countries that have a lot of money, right? Because you need money to train scientists, to develop new technologies, to get the resources to develop new technologies, to build the infrastructure. So it's fair to assume that in many cases, wealthy countries will benefit first from new technological advancements. And the way we tested this here is basically we looked at GDP per capita. So here, what you see on this graph on the y-axis, again, is the level of technology optimism in each country, with higher values meaning more optimism. And on the x-axis, you see GDP per capita, so basically a measure of the wealth of a nation or the economic activity. And to the right, you have the more wealthy countries, which are shown here as red dots, and the sort of emerging economies that are not as wealthy are shown as blue dots on the left-hand side. And what we find is actually, we do find a quite clear relationship between technology optimism and GDP per capita, but it's probably not the one that many people would have expected. What we actually find is that the richer countries get, according to their GDP, the less optimistic people in this country are about technological changes. And you can clearly see when you look at the emerging economies, which are kind of clustered at the left upper side. So really here in these emerging economies, we actually do find the highest level of optimism according to new technologies. And I think this points to quite an interesting fact. So when you think about technological advancement, you either can see it as a risk or as a promise, right? And we seem to find that in advanced economies, people see it more as a risk than a promise. And this might be related to the fact that when you're living in a country which is relatively speaking quite wealthy, then you see technological change rather as a disruption of the status quo and therefore at a risk to your living standards. And that might sort of undermine your reasonably comfortable position compared to other countries, for example. On the other hand, when we look at the emerging economies, people there seem to see tech more as a promise than a risk, which also makes sense because technological change might get the chance to reshuffle the deck, so to speak, so to catch up to richer nations and sort of increase your status as a nation. But it's quite an interesting picture. There's clearly is a relationship between the economic wealth and technology optimism, and it really shows quite nicely this dual character of technological change. It's both a risk and a promise, and depending on where you stand sort of in the ranking, you rather emphasize the risk aspect more or the promise aspect more. So now we talk sort of about the average country values, so basically the overall comparisons of different countries. But of course, our data set of 25,000 people also allows us to go on an individual level. So basically, we looked at our data to see which factors predict if an individual person is more or less optimistic when it comes to new technologies. And here, actually, across countries, we find quite consistent trends. So pretty much in all countries, you find that a younger age is associated with more optimism, meaning younger people are more optimistic about technological change than older people. The same is true for higher education levels, higher household incomes, and on average, men are more optimistic than women when it comes to new technology. And of course, these are all average values. So within each group, you will find a lot of variation as well. But these are sort of quite reliable demographic predictors of your optimism in new tech. What I find quite interesting, though, we also found another good predictor of technology optimism, and this is your personal life priorities or values. And specifically, we found that people who say that career is an important life priorities tend to have much more optimistic views about new tech. What do I mean by this? So we basically ask people to about different life domains and just to rate how important this life domain is to them personally. And with life domains, I mean things like your family life, your social life, your free time, and of course also your career. And it's specifically the people who say, yes, career really is an important part of my life. I value my career very much. These people are much more likely to say, yes, I also have a positive view of new technological advancements. And I think this is quite interesting because it shows that optimism about new technology is not just a factor of kind of hard sociodemographic facts, but it's also highly dependent on your personal value system. So now we talked about what kind of determines the optimism in a whole country, and also what determines the optimism for individuals. And so we could see there's quite a differentiation between optimistic and pessimistic countries when it comes to new technologies. But then, of course, the question now is why? So why do people feel optimistic or pessimistic about technological change? What do they actually expect will happen? And this is something we addressed by basically just outright asking people. So we asked people here, what do you currently think are the biggest opportunities you see for your country due to new technologies in the next 5 years? And importantly, we didn't give sort of answer options here, but this was really an open question, so people could just say anything they want to this question. And what I'm showing here on the upper side are work thoughts. So basically, a larger work means that this topic was mentioned more often. And below, there are also some example responses from actual participants shown. And of course, given just the sheer size of our data set, we can't possibly go to all responses, but this just at least gives you a bit of an idea what people said. And overall, I think it's fair to say that a frequently expressed hope that we find here is this promise that new technologies in the near future might actually boost efficiency and productivity. And this is both in relations to the economy, but also to public services. So here you see things mentioned like the hope for GDP growth or improvement of global competitiveness. So of course, the general public also thinks a lot about these economic issues. But it's also, for example, mentioned the idea that technologies might help to speed up public services. Another thing I find quite interesting to mention here also is artificial intelligence. You can see this is actually quite big in the workout, meaning this topic is mentioned quite often. And this is quite interesting because, as I said at the beginning, we never specifically asked people about artificial intelligence. So we never even actually mentioned AI in our questionnaires. But when we ask people open questions about their anticipation for the future, they just spontaneously mention AI anyway. And this really shows that this is a technology. This is on the top of the mind of most people. This was the most frequently mentioned technology. And here it's interesting to see it is actually mentioned within a positive association. So people, when they talk about hopes for the future, they actually mention artificial intelligence, meaning they have positive associations with AI. However, we also asked the opposite question. So we asked people, what do they currently see as the biggest challenges when it comes to new technologies? And here, the first thing to mention is that artificial intelligence is frequently mentioned as well. So both when we ask people about positive aspects, but also when we ask them about the negative aspects of technological change, artificial intelligence comes up quite a lot. So we can clearly say that people have very ambivalent opinions about AI. They both see positive aspects, but also have fear of some negative aspects. So what are the kind of fears that I mentioned here? There are quite a few different ones. Maybe, as you can see, for example, cybersecurity and data protection are topics that come up quite a lot. But if we sort of have to choose what is sort of the most prevalent fear of people worldwide, there's a clear winner, so to speak. The top global concern, so the concern that is most often mentioned, really is the job market and employment, or rather unemployment. So the fear of job losses due to automation and new technologies is very clearly in our survey the most frequently mentioned concern that people have. And this is actually also something we looked into a little bit more in our survey. So we asked people straight up, do you think new technologies will bring more or less unemployment in the next 5 years? And to make this maybe a bit more clearer, we also have a dividing line here. So basically, all the countries above this dividing line are countries where the majority of people says that there will be more unemployment due to new technologies. And all the countries below this mark, basically, they say there will be less unemployment during the next coming years. And as you can see, except for 2 countries, Netherlands and Morocco, all the countries in our survey, a majority of people says there will be more unemployment because of technological change. And this fear of unemployment is actually not related to the current unemployment rate in any country. So no matter if you live in a country with high unemployment or low unemployment, chances are that the most people in your country say actually there will be more unemployment in the future because of technological change that is happening right now. I think it was quite striking to emphasize this finding because when economists, also politicians, talk about technological change, it's often emphasized that it is important to engage with this because this is the guarantee for a future healthy economy and also for a future good job market. So most economists would say if you don't invest in new technologies, you will actually see job losses in your country. And there are good reasons to say that. It was actually also proven out by a lot of human history. However, the majority of people does not feel this. So the general public is rather concerned about unemployment than seeing the chance of more employment in the future at the moment. This brings me to a related topic, and this is this issue of the social divide or the wealth gap, which is, of course, quite an important topic in our time. And we also wanted to know from people if they believe that new technologies play a role here. So we basically asked people to say, which groups of people do you think will benefit from new technologies? And so we asked them, do you think that poor people will benefit? Do you think that people with middle incomes will benefit? Or do you think that rich people will benefit from new technologies? And here, basically, what is shown for each country are the percentages of people that say, yes, this group of people will benefit from technological change. And it's important also to say this wasn't an either-or question. So you could probably also say, yes, all of these groups will benefit or none of these groups will benefit. But this is not what we find. We actually find that people clearly see there as a dividing line here. So when it comes to poor people or people with lower or middle incomes, we find that a majority of our survey respondents say that actually they're not as likely to benefit from new technologies. So they're not convinced that these group of people will benefit. But actually a majority in each country definitely says, yes, rich people will benefit from technological change. So there's quite a social divide. There's basically expectations that new technologies will rather increase sort of this income gap, and that not all people will benefit equally from new technologies. And again, I think this is quite striking because it's sort of in contrast to the promises that are made by the tech industry. Because when you have to read a lot of press releases from the tech industry, you will often find this buzzword of democratization. So this idea that because of new technologies, actually create a level playing field for everyone. This might or might not be the case, but definitely we can say that at the moment, a majority of the general public does not believe this. They believe that rich people will benefit more from new technologies than people with middle incomes or poor people. And this then brings me to the last data point I want to show you today. Who should actually keep new technologies in check? Or rather, what we're looking at here is the role of the government in regulating new technologies. Or the way we phrase it here is we basically ask people, do you think that the government should play a role or a major role in ensuring the safety of new technologies? And so basically these blue bars that you can see here are the rate of people that say, yes, the government should play a major role in ensuring safety of new technologies. As you can see, in most countries, this is quite high. So in most countries, a majority says that, yes, the government should play a role here. However, this is then shown on this black line. When we ask people, do we actually think that the government is capable of fulfilling this role? Then we see quite a drop in numbers. And this essentially means that we have a trust gap here. So in most countries, there are more people who say that the government has a responsibility to steer technological change in a healthy direction. But there are less people that say that actually the government is really capable or up to the task. And I think this really poses a challenge for policymakers that now sort of have to prove to the public that, they can do this job or play a useful role in this capacity. And with this little call to action, I think I'm coming to the end of this sort of walkthrough that we just did. Just to summarize quickly what we saw here. So this huge data set of 25,000 people shows us that actually technology optimism is not equally divided across the board, but we see that there's much more optimism currently in emerging economies than in wealthy countries when it comes to technological change. Not surprisingly, artificial intelligence dominates a lot of public thinking about technological change at the moment. And people have very ambivalent feelings about this new, artificial intelligence. This can name both beneficial aspects, but also risky aspects. And sort of the major risk that people currently see is the job market or losses in jobs due to AI. At the same time, also a majority of people expect growing inequality, and while many citizens say that the government should play a role in ensuring the safety of new technologies, they're a bit more hesitant to say that the government is actually able to do that. And I think what this shows is that just when you're working in a technology business, or also when you're a policymaker, it can be easy to be swept up in sort of the excitement about the possibilities of technological change. And of course, there are good reasons to be excited about these things. But it's also important to note that in many countries, a majority of the public does not necessarily share your excitement. So there needs to be work done to communicate with the public in a way that addresses these concerns. Otherwise, you will risk a resistance to technological adoption. And this is something we know from research quite well, that if people are not willing to engage with new technologies, technology adoption will be slowed down or not happen at all. And with this, I thank you very much for listening, and I hope this was insightful for you.